Welcome to the first in the series of Sandbox presentations sponsored by the Center for the Study of Sport and Health at St. Mary's University in Halifax. This is the first for the fall 2015, and what I thought I'd do tonight is provide a review of the material that I'm working on, covered over 3 books. And this will give you an idea of where we're going with this material. I'm going to zip quite quickly through this. Don't panic, because in the subsequent nights we will be digging into it in more detail. Just a quick review of the peak performance workshop. It was based on, my portion was based on book 1, and Charles provided an excellent exposure to traditional Qigong exercise. But in my portion, I asked you to think of the world in terms of being an auto mechanic, where knowing all the what, where, whys, and whos, the 5 Ws, didn't really fix the problem. You had to know how. And you wouldn't take your car to a mechanic that didn't know how to fix it. So that's what these courses, these sessions are all about. We looked at beliefs, and we looked at our timeline as a method for healing, beliefs that were limiting, both in the past and the future. The bottom line is just being okay and learning how to use these tools to detach from unresourceful beliefs about yourself and the world. So the first book, zipping right along, is published and is out there. The main focus there that I will be zooming in on is values and beliefs, but there's a whole bunch of other material in the book, primarily based on how we build internal representations about the world and then act on them inside. And I also use meditation, of course, an introduction to meditation, and a very gentle introduction to Tai Chi. Results in this course have been used here with Heidi at the Center for our Motivation for Success course and our Peak Performance course. I'd like to zoom in on values and beliefs, because that's going to be the thread that goes through this book and the following 2. Values and beliefs. Here's a graphic from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you look at those, it kind of makes sense. But what is a little bit of a problem here is that the value of having physiological health is really a value, but there in this picture it shows a belief. So they're kind of mixing beliefs and values and behaviors all together. But what we'll do is we'll separate those out so we can work on them individually. So we'll look at values, what's important to you, and those values then generate beliefs about the world, about how you can satisfy those values, what you can do. And once you have your beliefs in place based on your values, then you can automatically go out and start doing things, adopting constructive mental states, resourceful mental states, and you'll start getting outcomes. This information is fed back through your observation of results, and you make further adjustments. This is called a cybernetic loop, and it's self-regulating. It's estimated we have about 40,000 inputs per second that we reduce down, we filter them out to what's important. And Carl Jung called this synchronicity. It's very, very much a balanced, self-regulating system when left alone. So let's look at it a bit deeper. If you zoom in on the values portion of this cybernetic loop, it is the central control. So once you have the values in place and defined, they begin to create your world, and you will delete all the information that's not relevant. You'll filter things out, and you may even distort reality to your own ends. So that's the control center. The key here is that your values should be sorted and prioritized. If incorrect priority or if this value is missing, you might run into some problems. The other key thing is that all of your values, when I say all, should be moving you towards what you want. And sometimes we can get values that are inverted. We'll look at this later, but are inverted and you get the wrong results. So this is great. The other area that we have direct control over is how we observe the world. That's where we get our validation about how we're doing. We get confirmations and affirmations. We develop new approaches. And this is where transformations happen, where you see something that you can change in your values and your personal beliefs and immediately starts generating new mental states and behaviors. Pretty magical, really. But there is a problem here. This is the back door to your own reality, to people's reality. It can be hacked. It's very vulnerable, mainly because it's primarily subconscious. We're not aware of how this process is working. And then things like hypnosis, subliminal advertising, and various other kinds of interventions can mess with this. I call it the witch view. So people, and maybe not necessarily being mean, but people can and do, and I used to do it too, can get into someone else's head and delete their values, resort them, invert them, and in some way alter them. This sort of radiates down, chunks down into conflicted beliefs, and then you get poor or less resourceful outcomes. The other important thing is that the outcomes go through the witch, and the witch determines the changes and so on. You don't want to do this. This is not at all at any time, even though you feel it's important. Here's the key. I like to say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Even though you think it's good, it's not the way to go. So we have another option here. If you want to help someone, here are two options. It's a voluntary, neutral adult influence. You're not taking ownership of that person. What you're doing is level one modeling. You just emulate. They will make changes in their belief system and their value system based on their admiration of you and their liking of you. The second approach is something that's a little bit more involved. It's called transmission, and where you actually transmit through all of the six modes of thinking to the person over time. This is what you would find in traditional schools of advanced learning and meditation and whatnot. Okay, book two. I like to think of it as developing group mindsets, resourceful group mindsets, and the whack of content in here. Some of it new, that's mine, some of it that is existing, such as systems theory and transformative theory. But boundary management, group dynamics, content-free learning, those kinds of things are, I think, relatively unexplored. And I have material for that. Again, we go into meditation and Tai Chi, but at a higher level. The end results that I hope to gain are this is something called creative learning environments and models for building communities or groups. Same idea here, but this time you'll have a group value system, and it's also self-regulating and a cybernetic, dynamic kind of environment. Very amazing when a group is functioning like this. Their values generate shared beliefs that are very resourceful. The feedback comes back to the group, and things start to happen magically. Oops, you can get the witch view here as well, and people will try to dominate the group, delete the values, invert them, maybe alter them to their own personal needs or desires. And again, the feedback from the group is always filtered through the witch. Again, we don't want to do this, and many people have identified that a good leader basically is unseen, is behind the scenes, and you don't see them. In book three, I'm going to look at a broader thing called it global impact, world impact. I haven't quite come down on a name that makes sense for this, but for now we'll just say world views. And here we'll look at global strategies and global use of values and beliefs. We also, since we're talking the world here, and when I say worldviews, I mean your worldview, not the physical world. We have to look at history. History is just full of how worldviews have changed the planet. We look at models for resiliency and creating worldviews, and something very magical is called being in step, a group that's in step. So here's the basic layout. There's a global mindset that people adopt to. The various groups have their own culture or whatever, but part of that group tunes into the global mindset. And here are the participants. Again, it's self-regulating, a cybernetic, very complicated system for a global worldview, but you have to have facilitators, and facilitators, they will have direct contact with your target group. There'll be promoters which don't necessarily have a lot of direct contact, but they'll provide information and products. Maybe you could say the media production, media community is a promoter. You need enablers in order for the target group to fully adopt the story and act as a single worldview. It may require laws and rules by government in order for it to work properly. And finally, there's something I call the controller. The controller owns the story, and they'll make sure that the story doesn't get modified. They'll keep the definitions clear and they'll maintain it. Okay, well, let's look at an example of a worldview that had dramatic impact, and most of you might recognize this picture as coming from Martin Luther King's major speech in Washington. So he was able to initiate a world phenomenon because he had a facilitator. The NSACP took him up, and they were the primary fill. They were in every community. They had hands-on contact through the churches to all of the various communities. In this case, the promoters were the worldwide media. When they covered the march in Selma, Alabama, it got worldwide attention, and everyone knew that something was wrong here. The enabler was the government. John F. Kennedy supported King, and this was the main reason that was able to take up validity, and he was able to march on Washington. Here the controllers were the various peace groups around the world that joined in and formed subgroups and bought into this whole idea. And without question, many people have identified this particular worldview as being the most significant in our time. Okay, let's take a look at another one. I like this one. It's called the open soft worldview. The story: free software for everybody. Sounds good, eh? Well, here's the layout of it, the model of it. The target group were users like you and me. The worldview wants them to adopt this new approach of using free software and sharing. So in this case, it was the manufacturer AT&T that gave its version of Unix to the free and open community, and so the manufacturers eventually all got behind them. Most of the major manufacturers support this. The promoters were the internet. Without the internet, free access to the internet, things just would not have happened. And back then, when it started in the 70s and 80s, the pipe wasn't very full, so internet providers saw this as a great way of filling the pipe. The government passed laws, so they enabled it, and then the universities became the controllers of the story. They quite often, such as the Open Source Foundation, were rooted in the academic environment that allowed this to happen. Without question, the open source has taken off, and today it's considered to be a major force in the computing environment. Whoops, a pirate. We do have an issue with worldviews over history. There are profiteers who will take over a worldview for their own power. So they want to take the power from the target group and pocket it somehow. I've got a couple examples of this. Let's look at something that everybody loves, the Easter Bunny worldview. The story is very simple: free candy from a rabbit. Who would not like that? Well, let's take a look at it. Here I identified the children as being the facilitators of it. They're the ones that really want mommy and daddy to go out and buy the candy. And whether they believe the story or not, they're going to go along with it because the end result is they get tons of candy. Target group is the parents. They're the ones that have to cough up and make everything happen. Corporations, I feel, are the promoters because they're the ones that get in there and make the candy and put the commercials on. Governments pass legislation to enact Easter as a holiday. And of course, the churches control the story. In itself, having free candy for kids, I don't really give candy to my kids, but I don't really see anything wrong with it, except what happened here. In that one day alone in the United States, it's forecasted in 2015, $16.5 billion was spent by parents. That's a lot of money in one day that went somewhere. Here's another worldview that I think is interesting. Here's the story. We have a war on drugs, and let's take a deeper look at this. The drug trade worldwide. Well, it's pretty clear who the target audience is. It's drug users. Interesting enough, I think the law enforcement have the hands-on with the drug community. They are the facilitators and create an environment where there are drug users. Promoters, I would say in this case, is cartels. You might come up with a different schematic. That's cool. But I say the cartels are the ones making the drugs and providing them. The government passed laws to keep this situation going. And of course, the media, being the controllers of this story, make it happen. It's a big, big deal. The United Nations identified in 1997 that $4 trillion annually went somewhere, disappeared, went off the market. This is where we're going. And what I have here is an exercise that we're going to do tonight. You have a choice. You can do crunch up belief. We can look at doing a group decision-making process. Or we can play let's make a movement game or identify a movement. Well, that's it for tonight. I'm going to say thank you, and we will have our next session next Thursday, 6 o'clock. And I really appreciate this opportunity to share this information and just to get it out there. Okay, we'll do a breakout now, and for you watching this on the internet, thank you for coming and participating.